We're going to take a little bit of time now to discuss some of the founding documents of the early republic. Of course, we've already discussed the Declaration of Independence, signed July 4th, 1776. Some of the key facts to know about the Declaration of Independence is that this officially severs political connections from the 13 American colonies with Great Britain. It also allows them to make an official alliance with the French government, or any other government for that matter, and it allows them to obtain French assistance in the Revolution. But as the American Revolution gained momentum, many political leaders saw the advantages of a centralized government that could coordinate the Revolutionary War. Since Continental Congress delegates had also informally discussed plans for a more permanent union than the Continental Congress, whose status was temporary, following the Declaration of Independence, the members of the Continental Congress realized it would be necessary to set up a national government. Congress began to discuss the form this would take, and they disagreed on a number of issues, including whether representation and voting would be proportional or state by state. The disagreements delayed final discussions of Confederation. With the British capture of Philadelphia, this made the issue that much more urgent. So delegates finally formulated the Articles of Confederation in which they agreed to state-by-state voting and proportional state tax burdens based on land values. But they did leave the issue of state claims to Western lands completely unresolved. Congress sent the articles to the states for ratification at the end of November. Most delegates realized that the articles were a flawed compromise, but believed that it was better than the absence of a formal national government. The Articles of Confederation served as the written document that established the functions of the national government of the U.S. Once it declared independence from Great Britain. It established a weak central government that mostly, but not entirely, prevented the individual states from conducting their own foreign diplomacy. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government faced many challenges in conducting foreign policy, largely due to its inability to pass or enforce laws that individual states found counter or against their interests. The 1783 Treaty of Paris, which ends the American Revolution, stipulated that debts owed by Americans to British subjects were to be honored, and also stipulated that former British loyalists could bring forth lawsuits in U.S. courts to recover confiscated property. These provisions were obviously unpopular, and many states blocked their enforcement, which led to the British refusal to vacate military forts in U.S. territory. The Articles created a sovereign national government and, as such, limited the rights of states to conduct their own diplomacy and foreign policy. However, in practice, this proved difficult to enforce, and the state of Georgia pursued its own independent policy regarding Spanish Florida, attempting to occupy disputed territories and threatening war if Spanish officials did not work to curb Indian attacks or refrain from harboring escaped slaves. Nor could the Confederation government prevent the landing of convicts that the British government continued to export to the former British colonies. The Articles also did not allow Congress sufficient authority to compel the states to enforce provisions of the 1783 Treaty of Paris. Consequently, these problems convinced colonial leaders that a more powerful central government was necessary, which led to the Constitutional Convention that formulated the current Constitution of the United States. The Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia met between May and June of 1787 to address the problems of the weak central government that existed under the Articles of Confederation. In attempting to resolve the issues under the Articles, as well as problems arising from the payment of debts from the Revolutionary War and other domestic issues, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention created a model of government that relied upon a series of checks and balances, by dividing federal authority between the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches of government. The framers of the Constitution had originally imagined a weak presidency with a strong legislature divided into a House of Representatives and the Senate. But as deliberations continued, the executive branch acquired more power to deal with some of the issues that had been a source of sectional tension under the Articles of Confederation. So the president acquired the authority to conduct foreign relations. The two-thirds clause for ratification of treaties in the Senate, as opposed to a simple majority, allowed the South a greater voice in these matters. Delegates from 3 of the Southern states threatened that their states would refuse to be a part of the national government if it denied their citizens the right to buy, sell, and own slaves. Delegates from other states opposed slavery, but they wanted the Southern states to be a part of the United States. The Southern states wanted to count the slaves as population for representation in the new Congress. The Northern states obviously did not want the slaves to count if they had no rights as citizens. They thought this would give the South an unfair advantage in votes taken in the House of Representatives. But finally, the two sides reached a compromise. The slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for representation in the House of Representatives, and this is known as the 3/5 compromise. Ultimately, this was the last opportunity without bloodshed to eliminate slavery, and Congress bungled it. So, now, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were out of the country whenever the Constitution was being written, and when Jefferson in particular returned, he was very unhappy. So Jefferson, along with people who agreed with him, these would be the Anti-Federalists or the Jeffersonian Republicans, they pushed for a Bill of Rights, basically the first amendments to the Constitution. Everybody recognized that the Constitution was a flawed document, but in Benjamin Franklin's words, it's about as perfect as we were going to get. I'm paraphrasing there. But the Bills of Rights, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, I listed out the first 3 here. What am I trying to say? Encouraged the maintenance of certain rights of the people so that the federal government would not be able to exert too much power over individuals and individual liberty. So, for example, the freedom of expression, so the right to express oneself in religion, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to petition. Amendment 2, the right to bear arms, which concerns their concerns over standing armies. The limitation of quartering troops. We talked about the Quartering Act. This was a big deal to them. They, homeowners must consent if you want to quarter federal or state troops. Now, with these founding documents, this is all well and good, but documents are not necessarily going to do anything for you if people don't really follow them or if somebody gets a burr under their saddle, right? So the passing of power from Washington to Adams and from Adams to Jefferson was incredibly important to the stability and the furtherance of the nation. Had someone gotten really upset that George Washington peacefully handed over the mantle of leadership, and they decided they wanted to fight to try to make Washington keep his position as president, well, that would have been bad. If people who seriously disliked John Adams, if people who seriously disliked John Adams decided that they wanted to overthrow him and make Thomas Jefferson president, that would have been bad. But because the passing of power, the passing of the presidential mantle from Washington to Adams and then on to Jefferson, because those were peaceful actions, peaceful events, the stability of the nation was held. So, We're going to end there for this part, and you'll pick up in your next lecture with a discussion of the key players of the early republic moving into the early 19th century.